Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Today we have an incredible panel, the Women of Fixed Ops panel. We have Linda G. Hansen, Dawn Newsom, and Tammie Ventura with us today. Ladies, welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so looking forward to our topic today. We've had a lot of conversations going on in the industry around new hire, best practices, onboarding, and then retention strategies with employees. And you ladies have some of the best practices in your respective organizations and throughout your career. So I'm really excited to be asking you these questions today. Dawn, I think I'll come to you first. So we're seeing a lot of organizations working to find the best talent, but the job market is competitive. There's a lot of industries outside of automotive that are vying for this incredible talent that's coming into the workforce. What best practices do you use in finding your employees that are the best fit for your organization?
Sarah, one of the things that we did a few years back, and it was hire a recruiter. And this person is solely focused on, the ads that are listed for the different job types, heavily focused on fixed operations, largely around technician recruiting, service advisor recruiting, and certainly service management recruiting. What I find, especially from employment needs that are not at the management level, when you put those types of tasks on a service manager who is drinking from a fire hose every single day, they make that call to that applicant that applied, and maybe the applicant doesn't answer, but they call right back, and then the service managers with a customer, they're handling a personnel issue. So I tried to take some of that back and forth off of their plates and put someone in place that, gets up every single day and does absolutely nothing but think about listing ads and responding back to them in a timely manner. And I've really noticed a difference in our ability to recruit quicker because we are able to follow up and have that touch point of that recruiter that's the liaison between the department manager that's actually going to make the hiring decision and the applicant.
Those are such great points, Dawn, because you're right. I didn't even think about some of that lag in between the service manager having to try to schedule that interview or try to schedule that follow-up conversation on a resume, and it just kind of getting lost in the shuffle. Linda, in your experience, what have you found, in an increasingly competitive job market, the best practices that you've seen for dealerships to utilize when it comes to finding the best employees?
Well, I'll tell you what, I agree so much with what Dawn said. Trying to take something off of the manager's plate will definitely make their life a lot easier. And we see a lot of times people will see an ad, and if the ad isn't written really, really well and doesn't give you the true picture of what the job entails, we see people applying that really are not a good fit. So having someone to be able to go through and weed those out and just present true qualified candidates, to me, that's a big part of it. I'm seeing more and more dealerships go ahead and put information on their websites, including what they're looking for, what the bonus structure is, what the career path is. I know there's a dealer group here in the Cincinnati area that lists for entry-level technicians, talking about express, and then they show the path going from express to general maintenance to B, C, A, and what the opportunities are at each individual level. And one thing that really impresses me is when I'm working with a dealership and I see that they have a program to provide the entry-level technician with basic tools. And a lot of times the tools, once you advance and you go from express to the main shop, once you have put in that time and earned your advancement, then the tools are actually belonging to the technician without having to pay anything additional. Because I know a lot of kids who are in the vocational high schools and in the career, tech schools, that's a huge investment for them. So trying to find some creative ways to attract talent who might go to a different field because they don't have to have that initial outlay of tools. So just a couple thoughts.
That's a great point, Linda, because that is a barrier sometimes to the job application. And I'm glad you also mentioned sometimes about the description of the job ad, because that can be a whole other deterrent or problem in the hiring process. Is you have candidates that are in the pipeline that don't necessarily have the best fit, but also that component of having a pathway for them to see how they're going to advance. Those are great points. And Tammie, I know with the Hudson Automotive Group and with BDC, you're working with a lot of different rooftops, and so you have a little bit different of a best practice mindset. So how do you go about finding talent for with a competitive job market and people that are right for your organization?
Yeah, I think Dawn and Linda both have brought up some really crucial points. One is, how do we lift that off the person who doesn't really have the time to dig into thousands of applicants and see what each one looks like, and is their resume even up to date? What are we looking for? What are the clear expectations and the key words there? And then Linda brought a good point to the table, which is being very clear with what you're looking for, the levels and the growth path. We talk a lot about a very clear path and what automotive can even bring to the table. I think people don't really truly understand the growth. And then the next question they have is, what does that growth look like? What does that career path look like? So with BDC, I have honestly found what works best for me. I mean, I do the old fashioned when I'm in a restaurant or I'm in a drive with Chick-fil-A. I do all that as well. I've recruited some people that way. I've had a couple of really good recommendations through people, but also I have a recruiter that I heavily depend on. He knows my very clear expectations. He sends me, I give him questions. They record videos with each individual. They send me answers to the questions. And you can tell a lot about a person by how they decide to record that video and what they feel is important to share with you, and the questions that they ask when you get a little bit further into the interview process. There was something, I actually broke into automotive recruiting. That's what I did. I worked for a recruiting company and hired across the country for BDC, for service managers, salespeople, just technicians, everyone. And so I have a lot of understanding from the recruiting side, but now when you actually go into the dealership, and I've been in the dealership world for a long time, about 18 years now combined, you start seeing the clarity of what you're actually looking for in the dealership. There was a questionnaire that we used to follow, and I still use it in my interviews today, and it has 10 words, and we set the clock for a minute, and I say a word and you say the first word that pops into your mind. So I say blue, you may say green. And believe it or not, there's a lot of psychology behind this. And when I was in recruiting, I used this, and the general managers and sales managers and service managers would say, you know what I love? I love this sheet that has the 10 words on it, because it gives me so much insight to this person's mentality. So, it's getting them in. And then I know we're going to touch on some other things, but then what do we do past that point as well?
Well, Tammie, I love that you mentioned the combination of using the technology component with the video. And then, with Dawn and you as well, it sounds like a recruiter having somebody to really manage just that piece of it, to get talent through the right channels so they can get into interviews and get, inspected. So if they're the right fit for your organization, it's really saving everybody a lot of time. And Dawn, I want to come back to you because I thought it was really interesting, all of the pieces with the Vaden Automotive Group. But, when we're talking about the onboarding process and the new hires, and you have a lot of different components that have been really successful in your organization. So what are some areas, in your onboarding process that you've implemented when hiring somebody for service?
So as a part of our onboarding process, if you kind of go back and put yourself in the employee's shoes, that day one experience is everything. It's like everybody says, it's your first impression. And what I was noticing a lot of was that on day one, the employee didn't necessarily know where to go. They didn't know who to ask for. They didn't have a login to their computer system. They didn't have a workstation set up. They didn't even have, a lot of times everybody's using laptops these days instead of desktops. So they didn't have a laptop, and it was just kind of standing around and, waiting for something to happen. So one of the things that we've implemented in our organization is this is called your day one process. And we have steps in the hiring process so that all of those things are taking place before the employee arrives. And in order for them to actually start working, they have to go through what we call orientation. And in orientation, they get, an introduction to the company. They get who's who in the company. They get, a printout that has, their company's name, address, who the managers are at their stores. And then they also get all of their logins, their login for their payroll. They get their login for, if you're using CDK or Reynolds or, Dealer Tracker, whatever your DMS is, so that when they arrive on site, now they just have to be pointed to their workstation. And we don't always get it right. Sometimes we miss the process and it gets shortcutted. But it's definitely an indicator that structuring the orientation of that employee makes that day one experience so much better.
Well, Dawn, and I mean, you're ahead of the curve because there's so many dealerships that don't have an onboarding process or strategy. It is, I've had that experience even in my career where it's your first day and here I am and everyone's like, who are you? And what are you doing here? And what job are you doing? And so it's great to hear, even if it's not perfect, there's still a workflow and a process and the expectation that these pieces will be done when somebody is coming on board. And Linda, from your perspective, that new hire training plan, there's a lot of components that show it can be really successful if implemented correctly. What pieces would you suggest dealerships look at in their onboarding?
Well, I like to talk about a concept called pre-boarding, where we start the onboarding before even day one starts. And I know a lot of the stores that I work with will send a welcome kit to the employee's home, which has a lot of the things that Dawn was just talking about with the information, the layout, where in the world do I park when I come in? If they've been to the dealership for a live interview, which I'm sure they have, 1, 2, perhaps 3 interviews, starting with the tour of the dealership before they're even hired, I think that starts to build that emotional connection. And onboarding, to me, pre-boarding, onboarding, and their first couple of days, that's time to build that passion and build that emotional connection. Because if they don't feel and absorb the dealership culture, they're never going to be good in their role. So I think making sure that they feel welcome, that they feel part of the team. And I know I've mentioned this on some of the previous panels before, but when I was a service director, my advisors didn't write up a customer until they spent some time in the dealership in the service department, mentoring, well, not mentoring, but mirroring technicians and spending time in parts. And the same thing with technicians. They didn't touch a tool or even open their toolbox in the morning until they spent a few days in service and parts, just learning the lay of the land and absorbing the culture. So I think the onboarding, the pre-boarding, and ongoing touch base meetings, just checkups. One of the things that I think is also a great thing is for the manager who is in charge of whatever department this employee is going to be in, takes them on a tour of every single department and let them sit there and talk to the people who work in the office, who work in F&I, who work in parts, just to get to know their comrades in arms, basically. And I think it's also a great idea on that first day for the manager to take that person and a couple other people from the dealership out to lunch to celebrate who they are and the fact that they're part of the team. So just some thoughts.
Those are some great points, Linda. And I love that you pulled in the pieces about bringing that employee across to other departments that they're going to ultimately be interacting with. There's nothing worse than being in an organization and someone answers the phone and you're like, who is that person? I don't recognize that voice. What do you do? What do you do here? What is your job? And that eliminates that whole situation completely because you have all of that cross pollination between departments. And Tammie, I would love to hear your perspective. So from your onboarding process and some of the best practices that you incorporate, what are the pieces in your organization that have been successful?
That's a good question. It is a little different in our world. I, can totally relate to Dawn and Linda being in the dealership world before. And I love, you're right. Like they show up and it's like, where do I park? Where's the restroom? Take them on a tour of the dealership. In our situation, we support 27 rooftops and we have 56 employees right now. It's a blend. We have South Carolina, North Carolina in a dealership, in a remote building, and then we have remote. So we have virtual. So we have to blend all those in. And how do we make everyone know the team, feel that they're a part of the team, and also feel that they're very much a part of the company? That's crucial. So to your guys' point, it's setting as much up pre-first day as we can, because when they get here, we want to hit the ground running with that person. So they're not sitting around trying to finish those little details and things like that. We want them ready for day one orientation. And I have an assigned agent that has actually become very good at this. And she takes them and she has a plan criteria that she puts them through. We spend the first day introducing them to Hudson, what that looks like, the different layers in the company, because there's so many different layers of the company, and what the growth pattern looks like for them, opportunities in the BDC if we haven't already discussed that, or if they have any questions, and just the core values, who our leaders are, who the leaders are in each individual store. We review the libraries in each individual store that we have set up, and we want them to understand who they're supporting. And every time they take a call or make a call for that store, they are an employee of that store, and we are teammates, and we're all here to support each other. So, that whole layer of introduction and what that first, second, and third day looks like is set up for them from the minute they sign in or walk in. If they're virtual, they're on camera, they're all over our screen. We call it our classroom. They're able to talk, and when they start taking calls, they can talk, but they can't hear each other. But if they unmute, they have us immediately. Natalia and I, my right-hand manager, we step in, we introduce ourselves. I have a day with them. I want them, some of them have been in dealerships before, some of them haven't. I want them to understand what it's like to be a service director, to be a regional fixed ops director, to be an advisor, to be a porter. We go through all the different positions in the company so they understand what it's like to be in a dealership. If they are close to a dealership, we send them to the dealership and they shadow somebody in service, because we support service, and they're able to get a better feel for how that really works inside of the store. So, it's just all those crucial pieces, like Linda and Dawn were saying, that help that person to truly understand what that culture and what that environment is like, so they can support it to the best of their ability.
That's awesome, Tammie. And I think in our last few minutes here, one of the other pieces that I know all of you have incredible experience with, but I'd like to just make this a lightning round question. So like maybe 30 seconds each. I'm going to put you on the spot, but promoting from within is a big topic too. And what advice, and I'll start Linda and I'll come around, and Dawn, I'll have you close. Linda, promoting from within, if there is a piece of advice that you could give in 30 seconds or less, what advice would you say dealers should best consider?
keep the lines of communication open and know how your people feel about opportunities for advancement. We may think someone is ready, they may not have any interest in making a change. And when you do identify them, use some of the tools. I love Tammie's tool with the red and green and the 10 words. But you've got all kinds of DISC, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finder, all kinds of assessments that you should be using with your staff as you grow them. And then basically you have a bench and you know who is ready and who might need a little bit more coaching and counseling. So,
Tammie, 30 seconds. Promoting
Holy
from within.
cow.
What best practice would you suggest?
Linda, I love your talk. I can talk on this all day long, as you know, Sarah. But promoting from within, huge believer in it. And like I said before on another podcast that we did, if they see it and they hear it and they watch it happen, they believe it. They become believers. But to Linda's point, do they want it for themselves as much as we want it for them? Are they ready for it? Right. There's a lot of coaching. We do leadership. We have leadership classes. We have mentors, layers of mentors. Are you ready to be a mentor? That's the next step. Are you ready to be a team lead? Are you ready to be a BDC manager? Are you ready to be the coaching and trainer? Are you ready to be the scorecard person? I like to give people that I think may be ready, and we've had those crucial conversations that Linda's talking about, a little project and see how they handle it, and then also keep their work going as well. So, that could be a whole other thing that you might want to talk about one day, but growing from within is very important. People, they're parents, they have children, they're grown, they want to be recognized as a person that can contribute and give back. And some people, I don't mean just, but they just want to be the best BDR they can be. And some people want to grow into leadership.
Dawn, you take us home. We got 30 seconds. Promoting from within. What best practice would you leave us with today?
I think the best practice from promoting from within is definitely making sure that you've got the person that wants the role as much as you want them to have it. That's been probably the best thing that I've heard on this call today. And I would say that in order to do that, you've got to spend time with what I call your bench. I'm always building my bench for the next manager. And it might start with lead advisors that may end up in lane manager roles, that then may end up in service manager roles and things of that nature. But the biggest thing I think that helps us promote from within is keeping the line of communications open for just your boots on the ground employees with senior leadership. So for instance, I meet with my lead advisors and I meet with my lane managers absent of their department managers to work on their development from a leadership standpoint, not necessarily based on what's happening in your store today, but about, what do you feel like you're struggling with? What's your team struggling with? And just listening to them and trying to pick apart, are they ready for the next steps? Or, have they met their capacity, or are they really happy where they are? And just like you said, some people don't want to take that next step. So communication, I think, is key from the ground up to determine if someone's ready and if you're putting them in a role that they can succeed in.
Well, everyone, on behalf of Ted Ings, thank you all for being part of the Women in Fixed Ops panel with us today. Linda G. Hansen, Dawn Newsom, and Tammie Ventura at the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Stay tuned. We have some incredible segments coming up next.